Before I started my current job as a medical dispatcher, I worked as a security guard for a private decommissioning company. My job wasn't to stop break-ins. It was to sit in empty, condemned buildings to prevent squatters and document wildlife damage. I'd worked in old schools and abandoned factories before. It was boring, lonely work, but the pay was double the normal rate. This was my third week working at the old St. Mary's Maternity Ward. It had been shut down for almost a decade after a new hospital was built on the other side of town. The stories about why it really closed, why they couldn't sell the land, were the stuff of local legend, but I didn't believe in any of that. I was working the graveyard audit shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I was running on about 3 hours of sleep because I had a sick dog at home. Usually, the silence was the hardest part. But that night, the silence was the first thing that felt wrong. I was assigned to monitor the East Wing, specifically the old long-term care floor. This wasn't the general recovery area. This was where they kept patients with severe postpartum complications. The floor was a maze of small rooms, each with a viewing window for the nurse's station. Most of the floor was dead quiet, except for room 214. There was an old intercom system that still had a buzzing current in the wall. Through the static, I kept hearing a woman's voice. Not a scream, but a humming. A lullaby. Her name, according to the old chart still stuck to the door, was Margaret. This was my first night patrolling this specific hall, and she would not stop. Every time I walked past, the humming would stop. The moment I sat down in the nurse's station, it would start again. I tried to ignore it, but around midnight, the humming turned into whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like the voice was coming from inside the wall behind me, not from the room. I'm a logical person. I know that old pipes settle. I know that wind whistles through broken seals. But I also knew that I was the only person on this floor. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward room 214. I opened the door to the room. It was empty, of course. Just an old metal bed frame bolted to the floor and a pile of fallen ceiling tiles. The air was freezing, which was strange because they'd cut the HVAC system years ago. I turned to leave, and as I pulled the heavy door shut, I felt a hard tap on the back of my shoulder. I spun around, ready to fight off a raccoon or a vagrant. Nobody was there. The room was still empty. I looked down at the dust on the floor. There were no footprints except mine leading in. I laughed it off. "You're tired, Jake," I whispered to myself. "You need caffeine." I walked back toward the central hub. There's a long hallway connecting the East Wing to the West Wing. It's about 150 feet of pure linoleum and flickering emergency lights. I was halfway down when I heard the sound of squeaking wheels. It sounded like a janitor's cart or a gurney rolling slowly behind me. I stopped walking. The squeaking stopped. I started walking again. The squeaking started again, exactly 3 seconds later, matching my pace. My heart started hammering. I started power walking. The squeaking turned into a loud, metallic screech, as if whatever was on wheels was now speeding up to match me. I broke into a sprint. As I reached the end of the hall, I glanced back over my shoulder. There was nobody there, but the heavy fire door at the opposite end of the hallway, the one I knew was locked with a chain and a padlock, was swinging wide open. I ran into the security office and slammed the door. I locked it and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. I have never been so genuinely terrified in my life, and I've been charged at by an angry bull mastiff before. I decided to check the security cameras. I pulled up the feed for the East Wing hallway. I rewound the tape. For 5 minutes, nothing. Then, I saw myself walk down the hall. I saw myself stop. But on the tape, about 20 feet behind me, there was a woman. She was wearing an old, faded hospital gown. Her hair was wet, and she was pushing a rusty cart full of stained linens. She wasn't looking at the cart. She was looking directly at me, and she was smiling. I looked at the current live feed for the hallway. The hallway was empty, but the camera for room 214 was different. In that room, on the live feed, a face was pressed against the glass of the window on the door. A pale, gaunt face watching the security office. I dropped the mouse. I didn't scream because my throat closed up. I just stared at the monitor. The face pulled back from the glass, and I saw a hand reach up and wave at me. Slowly, I grabbed my radio to call my supervisor. The radio just screeched static. Then a voice came through the static, clear as day. "The baby is crying, Jake. Go check on the baby." I didn't go check. I broke protocol. I threw my vest on the ground, grabbed my keys, and ran for the stairwell. I didn't look back. I hit the parking lot so fast, I almost threw up on the asphalt. I sat in my truck for 30 minutes before I had the nerve to drive home. The next morning, I called my boss and quit. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "I figured you wouldn't last long on that wing." Later that week, I met a retired cop for coffee. He used to patrol that area. I told him what I saw: the woman with the wet hair, the cart, the voice about the baby. He went pale. He told me that back in the 90s, there was a nurse on that floor named Margaret. She had a breakdown after a patient lost a baby during a late-night shift. According to the rumors, Margaret believed the baby wasn't dead. She was found in the basement, pushing a laundry cart, convinced she was taking the infant to the nursery. She died in the building the night it was decommissioned. They found her in room 214. That was the last time I ever took a job in an abandoned building. Some places aren't just empty. They're occupied, just not by the living. I don't know if I saw a ghost or if sleep deprivation fried my circuits so hard that I hallucinated a perfect match to a dead nurse. But the feeling of that hand on my shoulder, the wheels squeaking behind me, I still hear them when I try to sleep with the lights off. Comment on your terrifying experience at night on a visit to the hospital, and let's relate. Sleep tight.